Well, for more, let's go to Washington. Hussein Ibish is senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Always. Thank you.
The Palestinian Authorities shake up a cabinet reshuffle. What's your reaction?
Well, I mean, I think it could be a step in the right direction insofar as the world, the Israelis, the Americans in particular, and the Gulf Arab countries, Saudi Arabia and the US above all, are looking to the PA to start reforming itself in order to help them begin a process that's designed to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and then ultimately strengthen the PLO, which is the diplomatic wing of the Palestinians, get back into negotiations with Israel for a two-state solution. I think they're all thinking, both the Americans and the Gulf Arab countries led by Saudi Arabia and the other Arabs in general, are thinking their strategic planning hinges on a pathway to a Palestinian state. And for that, they need to have a more credible Palestinian representative. And so the PA is all you've got to work with on the ground and the PLO at the diplomatic register. So they want to strengthen those things. And, changing personalities is maybe a first step in that direction.
Newswire is suggesting an economic aid to Mahmoud Abbas could be the next prime minister. Is that just changing the chairs, rearranging the chairs on the Titanic?
Yes, I'm going to be honest with you. It is. Just replacing Mohammed Shtayyeh, who's an economist who's been in charge of investments and corporations, with Mohammed Mustafa, who's the head of the Palestine Investment Fund, which is, again, in charge of investments and corporations and holds certain companies on behalf of the Palestinians and the PA. And both of them are kind of in the inner circle of Mahmoud Abbas, and both of them have, especially Mohammed Mustafa, who's been in charge of this National Investment Fund, has really been a very loyal functionary of Abbas and has worked very closely with him and his family in ways that have benefited Abbas's sons and other people who are in the inner circle, maybe not necessarily at the expense of the national investments, but along with it, in ways that I think most countries would regard as improper. So, yeah, it's just a change of one personality type for a very similar personality type, and it doesn't really signal a major transformation. However, once you start changing people, you can really start, if you've had a big shakeup in the cabinet underneath Mohammed Mustafa, so that a lot of the familiar characters were replaced by real technocrats with people who had technical ability and technical knowledge, then you're talking. I think ultimately serious actors would love to see the return of Salam Fayyad, who was a great Palestinian prime minister, clean as a whistle, and created a lot of progress on building up the institutions of a Palestinian state, or someone like him. In other words, I think as long as we're sticking with the Mohammed Mustafa, Mohammed Shtayyeh type of people, you get one kind of outcome. And if you were to bring in people like Salam Fayyad, who are more independent, more purposive, more dynamic, you would get another outcome.
And does this increase at all the pressure on Israel?
Yeah, I think a little bit. It does. It's the more reform you have in the PA, the more they seem to be responding positively to demands for change, especially the more the change appears to be substantive rather than cosmetic. Right now, this will be regarded as relatively cosmetic, but it could lead to more substantive changes, especially if the cabinet really transforms and other people come in. Then I think it would really increase pressure on Israel, because countries like the United States, Saudi Arabia, and others would say, well, the PA is reforming, it's doing what it has to do, and it's doing what it can, in spite of all your pressure and all this violence and all these wars. Now it's up to you to respond. The PA can't become a strong institution under repressive Israeli occupation. It gives them no space to breathe. And so I think it's obvious that, well, they need to bring in the right people. Israel has to loosen the stranglehold and let them do stuff because as long as they can't move, then they can't really achieve anything.
Now, the pressure from the United States on Israel becoming a little more vocal Sunday,
Yeah.
with Joe Biden's national security advisor doing the round of the morning Sunday talk shows, Jake Sullivan. Let's listen to what he had to say about Israel's plans for potentially a ground operation in the only city they haven't been inside in the Gaza Strip, really, and that is the southernmost city of Rafah.
We have been very clear about our view here. We're talking about more than 1 million people who have been pushed into this small space in Gaza because of military operations elsewhere. It's also the area where all of the humanitarian assistance comes into Gaza to serve all of Gaza. And so we've been clear that we do not believe that an operation, a major military operation, should proceed in Rafah unless there is a clear and executable plan to protect those civilians, to get them to safety, and to feed, clothe, and house them. And we have not seen a plan like that.
Hey, Hussein Ibish, Jake Sullivan also used the C word, ceasefire.
He did. No, I mean, there's no doubt. The United States is, as expected, intensifying pressure on Israel to wrap up this war and get out of Gaza, because if the longer they stay, the more hard it's going to be to disentangle. And the last thing the U.S. wants is a permanent or semi-permanent Israeli return to the urban centers of Gaza over the long run, on the streets. And that's, of course, they know that's exactly what Hamas wants. It probably is what Prime Minister Netanyahu wants, but it's very bad for the United States and very bad for its plans. So the pressure then is slowly being ratcheted up. I think they know that Israel is going to do a Rafah operation, but they're putting very strong conditions. They have really said, you have to get the people out. You've pushed more than 1 million people down there. He was very clear. When he said military operations, he meant Israeli military operations. And what he was saying is, you've pushed these people into this little area. You did it deliberately. You can't now attack them en masse. You have to get those people out first. And it's very clear they can't go to Egypt. So Israel is going to have to do something to provide a place for these people to go, or forego the giant Rafah operation and do something much more targeted. One thing about Rafah is it does not appear that there are major tunnel networks under Rafah. Between the Egyptians and the Israelis, they seem to have prevented that. And therefore, it's, I think, entirely possible to do operations in Rafah in a much more targeted way with special forces, or even forego it possibly, or move the people out and get them somewhere else. There are many options for the Israelis, but one thing that isn't an option is just to attack Rafah as it is now and massacre these civilians.
And just because we're confused, on the one hand, they're talking about a ground operation in Rafah, on the other, they're sending a delegation to Doha to negotiate a truce, or as Jake Sullivan now calls it, a ceasefire.
Right.
Can Benjamin Netanyahu keep the international community guessing, and if so, for how long?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think they know what's going on. One of the things that's happening is he's under tremendous domestic pressure to get a deal with Hamas to free the hostages. And he's under tremendous international pressure to do a deal with Hamas to create a pause for at least 6 weeks or a few months, where you could get humanitarian aid in, you could get all these people out of Rafah, you could get people back into Gaza City, you could maybe start some reconstruction and avoid kind of a calamity with infectious diseases and all that. So there's a tremendous lot of pressure on him from those ends, domestically and internationally. But he wants to go into Rafah as soon as possible. And is a hard right in Israel that wants to do that and doesn't care how many Palestinians get killed. So he's trapped between those two imperatives. And in the end, I think Rafah is going to have to wait. Whether he will agree to, and Hamas will agree to, a reasonable agreement to free the hostages in return for pause and release of Palestinian prisoners, I don't know. But I think it looks increasingly plausible. And it will certainly please almost everybody else if those two parties agree to that. The problem with the war is everybody wants to wind it down except for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar, and they're the only two people who could really do that. So it's a bit of a a contradiction.
Hussein Ibish, so many thanks for speaking with us from Washington.
Anytime, François. Thank you.
Stay with us. There's much more to come, more news, plus the day's business and sports.